All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Hello, Glasgow and Edinburgh and wherever you are. Um, Nice to be here with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about CUJs today, and I think we'll have enough time for Q&A afterwards. A little bit about myself. I'm Swiss. My name kind of doesn't reveal it because my parents are from Argentina, but I've been born and raised in Switzerland, so I call Switzerland home. And I've spent the last 14 years at Google, building and scaling UX teams in different sites, as you've heard in YouTube ads, cloud, also in Google Play. And I've left Google at the beginning of this year. That's why I removed the Google reference from these slides. I had forgotten to remove it. I left Google and founded my own company. I'm focusing on coaching and training UXers around the world, helping them in their careers, setting them up for success. After 14 years at Google, it was a good time to do something new, and I'm very excited about that. Um, all right, so this topic is about critical user journeys, and holistically speaking, it is about how to prevent companies from shipping their org charts. So, if you're working in product development, it's likely that at one or the other moment in time, you have created products that somehow reflected your company's organization in the product, and users had to go through your organization, figure out how this works. And at Google, this happens a lot. This happened a lot in the past. It still happens. And this effort, the critical user journey effort, historically goes back to a time when uh, Google did a lot of org chart shipping. So Google was growing. There were a lot of different products, a lot of different PAs, we call them product areas, and everybody was working on their own things. And then the legend has it that Larry Page was asked by a good friend that he bought a new Android phone and if Larry could help him setting up that phone. And apparently that was really good friends because I don't think anyone can get that kind of first level support when setting up their Android phone. But Larry said, yes, come over for a beer and I'll help you. And so he helped him set up the phone. And when Larry did that, he kind of for the first time experienced himself what it meant to be a new user without a Google account, without previously having had all these credentials and your Android phone set up. And what you see here is the entire flow that Larry had to go through to set up successfully that phone for his friend and let him send a text message, I think it was, or a YouTube account or something like that. And so Larry got very upset and was like, why is our product so bad? And why is Apple's so easy? Because Apple had like just a few setup screens and was really sleek. And so he went to UX, to the UX org and said, like, we need to do something about this. Like, why is this bad? This is all your fault, blamed UX. And then UX said, like, no, 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 this is not our fault, right? This is because the entire way products are being developed at Google are being done like very, very company focused and very technology and engineering focused. And we don't actually focus on the journeys. And so out of that anecdote, the critical user journey effort was created at Google. So just to explain that this problem that companies ship their org structure is old and like is well known, like in industry, this is like a very old phrase from Conway who said summed it up really nicely. Who said organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of their communication structures. And that's like the way we structure a company. Like we'll have an org chart, and this is the way we communicate. And so that's why we will ship our org structure. And at Google, that was exactly the problem, right? It's not like those different flows that the users had to go through were bad because they were obviously well designed and tested for that particular part of the Google organization. But sticking them all together created like a really bad experience, and nobody was in charge for that. Everybody was in charge for their own little silo, and together it created a broken journey. And so how do we prevent that, right? And obviously the most obvious answer to that especially from UXers, will be, well, that's why we need to develop in a user-centric way, right? So we have user-centered design, and all these processes will help us to focus on users, and we focus on users, then we actually will focus on their most important problems, and that's when we create good products, right? And if you think I'm going to do an introduction to user-centered design here, no, that's not what I'm going to do. Obviously, you all know what that is, right? But the question for all of us when we work in companies that develop products is, how do we help transition our product teams to be more user-centered in the future? So how do we transition teams to be more user-centric, right? And that's part of every UXer's job. Like you will always be constantly engaging in that. Maybe you have achieved some successes, then somebody leaves, somebody else comes, never worked in that way. You need to advocate for it. So it's a constant battle that we're typically going through when we work that way, right? And there's different tools that teams have or that UXers have on how to do that. And there's like many things people can do. Like this is not a full list. These are a couple of examples. I'm also not going to go through all of them, right? But there's things you can do, focus on research, on how we collaborate, or also in the design process that will help teams to focus more on users, right? And within that list, right, if you look into the research bucket, right, you have this part where it's about understanding user journeys. And I'm sure all of you have spoken about this in different moments and times, like understanding the user's flows, the journeys, like which are the most important things, right? That is an important tool we have realized at Google that helps teams to focus on the most important things, and that's what the critical user journey effort is about. So it is about understanding the most critical user journeys, not all journeys, the most critical one, the most important ones, to enable teams to integrate that along the product development process and to give users a voice in that process where it matters, like to constantly ask us again, like which are the most important things users are doing and how do the things that we're working on, how will they impact those journeys? And so this is a tool to help us understand in scalable ways those user needs. We need that tool to then place that in product development at very different stages. And I will introduce first to you the tool, the critical user journeys. What are they? Then I will explain to you how do you measure those journeys. And then at the end, I will show you how you integrate it in product development, which are examples of how you can do that to steer your organization towards a more user-centric future. So what is a critical user journey? A critical user journey has three components. It has the user, it has a goal, and it has the tasks that the user needs to do to achieve those goals. And the CUJ is a combination of these three things, right? The users, like who is trying to do something, what are they trying to achieve, what are the things they need to do to achieve it. So it's rather simple, and obviously there's many models that you might have seen as a UXer already that are similar to that describe like important journeys from users. So here's an example CUJ on how it is when you phrase it out, right? It is purposely written from the user's perspective because we want the organization to focus on users, right? So we don't want to talk about us, we want to talk about the users. So here, as a small business owner, that's the user, the type of user I am a small business owner, right? I have a goal, which is I want to connect with my customers. That's a goal every business owner has. You want to get in contact with your customers, right? And which are tasks that you will do to do that, right? There's different tasks, and this is not a full list of the tasks. This is only two examples. One thing would be that you respond to reviews that they left to you on Google Maps or other review platforms, right? Or another one would be that you send a marketing email to your customer base. So these are different tasks that you would do. And that would be maybe a critical user journey for a small business owner when it comes to running their business. So let's focus now on the goal specifically, right? Every journey starts with a goal, with a deeper need that users have in mind. things that they want to achieve, right? And so here we are answering the why. Why is somebody doing something? We're not really describing what they do, but we're describing why they do something. So it's deeper needs, and doesn't describe how they use the product. It is human, it's from a person's perspective, so we create that empathy, and it should be helpful for us to envision what they're trying to achieve and how we could help them in the future. And here are 3 examples for goals for different Google products. So we would have a first Google Photos. A goal for Google Photos could be that I want to share memories with families and friends, right? There's obviously a lot of photos in my Photos app, but I want to share some of those memories with families and friends, not only for me. So that's an important goal. For Google Maps, it could be that I want customers to understand my business. I have a business, it is appearing in Google Maps when they search for somebody to cut their hair, for instance, a barber or something, right? I want customers to understand my business when they see my business on Maps. And a goal for YouTube could be that I want my kids to watch appropriate content for their age, and I want to make sure that's the case. So these are example goals, right? These are not goals that are necessarily from CUJs that those teams are using nowadays, right? I don't know about that. Like, these are just possible goals for those products. And then when we have that, so we know the goals, we move to the task level. And the task level is describing the specific steps that a person needs to do to complete that goal. So here we are moving to the how. How are they achieving the goal, right? We explain what they're doing with our product or with products, right? Maybe it's not everything is with our product. Maybe it's multiple products that they're using, and our product is one step of that. The tasks should try to be as feature agnostic as possible, although realistically they are very often describing features. But it is important for you to try to leave room for teams to understand if there's other ways people could achieve their goals, right? If you're baking all your features into the tasks, you might be constraining yourself. So that's why it should be describing the present, like what are you doing right now, but we could also describe the future because we're constantly evolving, right? Here are examples for tasks that users would do for the goals that I listed before. So if I want to share my memories, families, and friends, then a task is that I send photos to them, right? For Google Maps, I want customers to understand my business. I upload pictures from my business and products to my entity on Google Maps, right? And if I'm on YouTube and I want to make sure my kids are looking appropriate content, I might be reviewing the videos that they watch to make sure it's all appropriate, and I can take measures if that's not the case, right? These are example tasks. There might be many tasks that users do to achieve that goal. Imagine the one from YouTube, right? So you're reviewing the videos, but you might also want to configure what they're actually allowed to watch on YouTube. So you go to the settings, security settings, and you make sure to block some non-age appropriate content, these kind of things. So there could be multiple tasks that you do to ensure that goal. And so this is what CUJs are, right? And if you want to apply this framework, what you need to do is you need to define the goals for your product and come up with a list of the most important things that your users want to achieve, right? And this is a process that you do cross-functionally with your PMEng counterparts, but also with other disciplines. Imagine customer support, imagine marketing, other functions that are working for this product, right? Because you want to make sure that you actually cover the most important ones. So you look at past research, you look at any kind of insights you have, and you do like workshops, sprints, where you put that together and you start brainstorming which are really the most important things that are users want to do with their product. And if you don't have that list right now, that's something you should really get, right? You should have a clear understanding which are the 5 to 7 most important things our users are doing with our product. And why is it 5 to 7? It is 5 to 7 because we have found this is a good number that is still manageable, that people still have in their head, so they still will have a good understanding about the most important things without forgetting about them, right? You can use them in product development. I will show later on how to do that. And so these kind of things are important, that they're feasible, right? This is a tool that should change the way you develop products, at least a little, right? And so it is not important that everything is covered, right? It is important that you create something that can be used during product development. And Google has learned that the hard way, because when we first came up with a CUJ framework and we rolled it out, teams started creating those CUJs. And what happened is that every team that was working on a feature created CUJs for their feature. And then all of that was aggregated, and we ended up with lists with hundreds and hundreds of CUJs. And these were not manageable, that you couldn't update them, you couldn't use them in product development, they were completely useless, right? And why was that the case? Because we had, without understanding it, we moved to the task level. So we had now basically every task was a CUJ, and that's not the case. Remember, a CUJ consists of a high-level goal, an important need that a customer has that they want to achieve with your product, right? It's not, no customer has the need to like change the setting of your data sharing like configuration, like that's not a CUJ, right? That might be a task that they do for an overarching CUJ that they have to keep their data secure or something like that. And so that's the level you need to move to. If you have a very large product, it might be, maybe it's 8 or 9, maybe it's 10, but you should never have more than 10 CUJs, because else it will not be helpful during the process of developing products. And so what you see here on the right-hand side are 7 goals for a made-up music streaming app. And I emphasize that because it's not YouTube. These are not the goals for YouTube Music. It might be, but I just make them up to show you an example. So one goal, the first one would be, I want to effortlessly find and play the exact song album I'm craving, right? So I know exactly when I want to listen. I want to listen to that. I think most of you will have a music streaming app. You will agree this is an important goal that you have for your music streaming app. Then you want to discover new music that matches your taste, right? New artists. That's also an important goal. You want to have your favorite music always at your fingertips. So like you can easily and quickly go to your favorite music and listen to it. If you listen to music, you don't want it to be interrupted, right? So if you're on the go and you lose connection, you still want to listen to that song and not to stop playing. That's also an important goal. You want to share your favorite music with friends, because that's something you do when you discover something new and exciting band, right? You share it with your friend. You know they have a similar taste, so listen to that so you share. You want to personalize your experience so it reflects like what you like, what you want to listen to, like your behaviors. And then the last one is you want to monitor and manage your subscriptions, right? You have to maybe pay for that, right? So you want to make sure this is all the settings, like security settings, like all these things, you want to make sure all is being handled well. So these could be 7 most important goals for music streaming app, right? And I'm sure you will come up with other goals you have for a music streaming app that are not there, but maybe they're not that important. Or maybe they are, and maybe some of those need to move away, right? But at the end, you should not have a list of 50 or 100 things, because nobody wants to do a list of 50 or 100 things with their music streaming app. It's likely just a couple. And together, they cover a good set of things that your users are doing with your product. So now, when you have that list, you came up with those goals. Now you need to understand which tasks are involved in users achieving those goals. And you might have research showing that. You might have logs that you can look into. Some of it might just be like the knowledge, the tacit knowledge you have in the company, the different people that work on the product. So you can harvest that and you can put that together. So here's an example for a CUJ about sharing your favorite music. So you have, as a rock music lover, I want to share my favorite music with friends. So that's my goal. What do I have to do? I find the song, album, or playlist, right? Then I open the sharing options and I choose the sharing method I want to use. And I share that particular song or playlist with my friends. So these are the tasks. There might be other ways of achieving that. And if there's other ways of achieving that, you need to describe that, right? But these are tasks that users need to do to share the favorite music with friends, right? So you do that for every goal. You start mapping the kind of tasks that are needed to achieve it. And when you have that, you need to focus on understanding the users, on measuring those things. Because one of the things we have found at Google that was a game changer in making the CUJ effort stick better was when we moved away from describing those things to actually measuring them, right? So how do we do that? How can you start measuring CUJs? If we do that, if we start to measure, right? If you measure, you're always describing good or bad, right? Because you want to describe like are we doing well or not, right? So what we have goals and we have tasks, and what does excellence mean for those two concepts, right? If you have goals and you are helping users achieve their goals, right? You have a useful product. So users find value in your product. They can achieve the goals that they have, right? That's why it's excellent. You're meeting their needs. So it's a useful product. If you're moving to the task level, we're talking about usable. So not only can they achieve their goals, but they can actually achieve it efficiently and effectively, and they're happy with it. So they know how to use your product successfully. And that means it's usable. So these two things we want to measure. We want to measure, is it useful? We want to measure, is it usable? So we understand how we're doing with those CUJs. So the outcome of if we have useful products is happy users. We have useful products. How do we measure that? We measure that by understanding the happiness for that particular CUJ. So we're talking here about not product happiness, but CUJ happiness, right? And what Google does to understand that is often to measure that in product with action-triggered surveys. So we have short surveys we show users to ask them about the CUJ experience, not holistically. So we don't ask, how happy are you today with Spotify, right? But we will ask about those CUJs that we defined so we understand how happy you are with those specific CUJs. And this is an example for how that looks, right? You have a targeted survey that you show to users, ideally when they are in that CUJ or when they completed that CUJ, because you know from their behavior that they are likely in that CUJ. So you're showing them a survey, and so how satisfied are you with using our product for the following? Listening to music without interruptions. And now they can indicate how satisfied they are. And that way we will understand happiness for the particular CUJ, and we can start using this data to inform the teams. So this is a made-up dashboard where you would show those results, right? Maybe here, like percent of happy users would be users indicating that they're rather happy or very happy, right? And so you have here, like for the CUJ, I want to effortlessly find and play the exact song album I'm craving. 80% of users, these are all made-up numbers because it's a made-up app, right? 81% of the users are happy with that particular CUJ. So you know you're doing well. Not everybody can be happy always, right? Can't win always. There's never 100% satisfaction, but 8% is pretty good. So you're doing well there, right? And if you go more down, right, you might have like, oh, I want to share my favorite music with friends. Only 43% say they're happy. So you're asking them about happiness of that particular CUJ, but a lot say they're not happy. So now you don't know why, right? You only know what. That's the thing with this kind of measurement. You will know that they are not happy. You need to do more research to understand why are they not, like what's the problem, but at least you know there might be a problem in the sharing functionality. So that's for goals. Now we're moving to tasks, right? And we say like, okay, users know how to use a product and they can use it successfully. The outcome of that is that you have successful users, you have usable product, so that's obviously a good thing. How do you measure that, right? And there's pretty much two ways that Google uses to measure that. One is that you do benchmark studies where you have those people do those tasks, right? So it could be moderated, unmoderated. They have a list of tasks they should do, and you record all of that, and then you analyze like how successful they are, how many problems they had, and you report back like benchmarks where you go like this is how the tasks work, this is how good they are. That has been not such a successful way of doing it because it gets quickly stale. It is a lot of work to do it, and then you need to update it regularly, and it's a lot of work, a lot of burden on the researchers. We have moved more and more towards measuring it through logs, because logs they're there. You have the behavior of users, right? You know which tasks they're doing. You can measure that. You can understand their flows and then report it back. And this is constantly updating. You can attach it to experiments. You can attach it to new launches and so on. And that has been something that is really helpful to implement those CUJs and help teams use them. And here, like a quick insight, a quick look into the measuring of tasks using the logs. When you do that, it's important to look into which is the start and the end of your particular journey, right? So which are the moments that indicate from the logs that a user is entering that journey, right? And then which are the signals that would indicate that they have ended the journey. And ending the journey can mean success. That means completing the task, but it can also mean that they have terminated it, that they have abandoned, or they are restarting the task, right? And so basically you have a task start, and then you have a bunch of actions that they do, and you measure all of them, all the steps they do, right? In between, deviations, how long they take, all these things you measure, right? And then you have to find particular places where you go like, okay, if that happens, they have likely completed or aborted or whatever. And that way you can then understand the task success. If you want to do that, it's important that you identify those key signals, which I just explained, that you then check if they're instrumented, because astonishingly, Google is not measuring everything, and I'm sure you're also not measuring everything. So it might be that you're not measuring what you need, so you need to ensure that it's instrumented, that you actually have logs for that stuff. And then once you have that, you can start connecting the dots and understanding what that means. And here's an example for that, how that can look like. This is a made up flow, user flow for the CUJ of like listening to music, to a particular song that you're interested in, right? And so you know when people are entering that flow, right? When they open up your app, and they either search or they do something on the main page, right? And so you see that a certain small amount of people are actually searching, but a large amount of people are taking action on the main page. They discover there what they want to listen. They either go through genre or they select a specific artist, right? And people on the search side, they do search and they get search results, right? And so based on this here, on the search results and these different actions in artist and genre, they will then either initiate some kind of a music experience and they will actually listen to something, or they abort, they abandon, they don't listen to it, right? So you have now a bunch of flows, right? And you can say, you could say, well, the ones that initiate a music song, that's success because they started listening to it. If they abandon afterwards, we don't consider that not a success because maybe they didn't want to listen to the entire song, right? So that's okay, right? So listening and listening the entire song or abandoning, that's fine, right? But if they go to search results, to search for something, and then they don't listen, we consider that a failure. You could say that. Or you could say it's actually not a failure. Maybe they just wanted to know the artists, like how that song is called exactly, or something like that. So these are things you need to define for your particular product. Like what thing do we consider a failure or a success, or are there maybe certain things we cannot categorize because we will not know what the attention was, and so we need to leave it hanging, right? But now you can start to understand these flows, and you can start to understand where do people take detours, where do people abandon, where does it take more time than needed, and And you can do that constantly. You can measure day by day. You can report that out. You can go into dashboards. You can understand how things are doing, right? And when you do that, then you get for task health, you get a similar amount of metrics for those CUJs where you say like, okay, for I want to, for let's say find and play exact. So in album, we have 92% of the cases we consider healthy. So we don't think it is a problem. They actually are able to do what they want. There is a certain amount of tasks which you see here in orange, which are maybe tasks that were not ideal. Maybe they took detours, but at the end they were able to complete. And red would be they failed, right? And you do that for all the CUJs. And so maybe you see there here, like I want to share my favorite music with friends, right? You see that you have a certain amount of users that fail to share, right? They go in the sharing dialog and then they don't share. Well, they click on share, but it's not functioning. So maybe there's a bug. Maybe an important sharing mechanism is missing. Maybe they want to share it through a specific app, but it's not there, or any other things, right? So you need to start investigating why that could be the case. You still don't know why, but you know there might be a problem. And so now when we have CUJ happiness and CUJ health, right, we can put that all together in a dashboard. And we can say, like, here's how happy people are with the different CUJs. And here's from a task level what we consider to be successful journeys, like medium successful detours, and then the ones that we consider failures, right? And you can put all of that together and look at it, and you have a view into how your journeys are doing, the most important things for your app, and how are they doing. And you can add to that different things. You can now say, okay, we have open-ended comments that come in through those surveys. We analyze them nowadays with AI. You can have a lot of them automatically analyzed and have like topics being reported, right? You might have qualitative insights from your qualitative research. Maybe you have analysis from customer support, other sources. You can put that together, right? You can map it, and then you have like a good view on like how are we doing with our most important tasks. So by measuring those CUJs, right, we are quantifying user behavior and satisfaction, and we can use that for product development. We can use that to change the way our teams work and develop products. And how can we do that? Here's a couple of things that have been done successfully at Google to help the teams focus more on users. One thing you can do is you can include CUJs in your PRD. So PRDs, like the requirement docs that are written by PMs when they describe whatever feature they want to work on now, right? And those, they typically have things like, okay, like how will we measure success, right? And it might be something about revenue or efficiency or whatever, right? But what we started doing is in the PRDs, in the templates, to include a CUJ section. And in that CUJ section, a PM has to describe which CUJs will be impacted by this feature and how, right? And by doing that, you're forced to think about users and about how this particular thing will impact any of those journeys. And maybe it's not impacting any of those journeys. It doesn't mean it's not an important feature. Maybe it's something you have to do, right? Maybe it's something that is really important for the app, but it's not targeting any of those CUJs. But it's important to know that. And if it is changing some of the CUJs, you should describe that. And you should also describe how are we expecting the CUJ metrics to change. Do we expect users to be less happy with the CUJs afterwards or happier, right? Do we expect the tasks to be more efficient or not, right? These things you can describe in the PRD. And so suddenly you have PMs talking about users and taking a user focus and thinking about the most important things that are being done in your product, right? When they have to describe what they want to work on. A second area where we're using CUJs is prioritization. So every team, every product on the entire planet will always have way more things to work on that they can actually staff. Typically at Google, these are lists with hundreds of things that we should work on, and you can work on just a couple dozens, maybe, right? So how do you prioritize? And there's many things to take into account when you prioritize, not only users' perspective, but a user's perspective is also an important one, right? So when you go through different efforts, right, now we start adding CUJs to those efforts. So we're mapping this effort to different CUJs. This effort would impact CUJ2 and CUJ4, right? And we do know if CUJ2 and 4 are doing well or not. We have data for that. We have the CUJ happiness and we have task health, right? And so now we can take this as an additional signal, right? Okay, when we need to choose what to work on, right? We know CUJ4 isn't doing well. Why don't we try to prioritize some of the efforts that would improve CUJ4, right? Suddenly you're using user data to prioritize efforts instead of maybe looking only at revenue or engineering excellence. A third area where we started using it is mocks and prototypes. When designers are exploring different solutions, different features, new things to change in the product, instead of them describing only that feature, they start to describe the entire CUJ. So they show the entire CUJ to create a better view on how this feature will impact the entire journey, right? And that creates a much more holistic way of looking at things, which has helped the teams to take better decisions that they would maybe not have been able to take if they only look at the specific flow of that specific feature that is being worked on. Another area that this is being used for is to understand launch readiness. Remember, I told you that you can measure CUJs constantly if you use the logs, and you can measure the CUJ happiness constantly if you ask users with those surveys, right? And so now, if you have a new version of your product that is ready to launch, or you think it's ready to launch, you can launch it to a subgroup of users, and you can measure CUJ happiness and tasks health too. And you compare how is our old version doing to the new one. Are we ready for launch? Or are we seeing any problems in the CUJs that we need to fix first? Or are we even better, which would be a good sign that we should actually launch, right? These things you can do when you're starting to use CUJs that way, because now you're using the most important journeys as a reference to understand if you're ready to launch or not. The fifth area is user feedback, right? We have a lot of user feedback coming in, not only through user studies, but yeah, you have customer support, different feedback channels, and so on. And what is a good way to look at that feedback is to actually categorize it into CUJs, to map it to CUJs. Say like this particular feedback, these problems are about this journey, right? And so when you start doing that, because again, you will have way too much feedback that coming in that way, you cannot fix all of that. But you can look into feedback that is about specific journeys that you know you're not doing well, right? So now if you know people have problems with sharing the music, right? You can go to your user feedback database and you can query that and you can say like, show me all the reports about sharing, right? And then you can look at that, you can use this as a source to inform some of the efforts to improve that experience. And that is also the last effort that we're have used it for. The last example is bug fixing. Like at Google, you have a lot of once a quarter, typically they do like a bug fix week where like everybody stops working on whatever they were working on for a week. They start just dealing with bugs. And there's always way too many bugs, right? And here again, you can map bugs to CUJs. And if you do that, you can look at the CUJs that are for specific, bugs that are for specific CUJ you know is not doing well, and you can start prioritizing those in those efforts, which has had a lot of good results. Okay, that was it. That was my little spiel about CUJs.